I'm just saying today might be the day to let me have the last muffin. Like today was a good example, because sometimes, I don't know why, we will talk about this when we talk to Cameron in our ADHD episode, or ADHD medicine episode. Um, because I don't know if this is normal, but like this morning, I took my ADHD medicine, and granted, I took it with a Pepsi, which I don't know if that's like psychologist approved. And I didn't eat breakfast. I just had the Pepsi. I took medicine. I walked the dog, and I came back and I went to bed. And then I woke up and my teeth were chattering because of my ADHD medicine, which doesn't usually happen. And it doesn't always happen, but it did today. And so I decided, if I'm laying in bed and I'm so amped up that my teeth are chattering, maybe this is not the time to work on finalizing, my book on neurodiversity in the workplace because it might come from more of a place of anger than I would like it to. This might not be the time to call Comcast customer service. Maybe
Yeah,
I should just,
you're a little energized today there, babe.
yeah, yeah. So, we'll try to do regulating things today. So, I don't know if there's any deep relationship conversation that you want to have. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow. Just saying.
Well, what do you think? Should we make a podcast?
Let's make a podcast.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult, a Neurodiversity podcast, the show where potential went to die. I'm one of your hosts, Ellie Michaels. I use she, her.
And I'm your host, Jessica Michaels, and I use she, they.
And today we're talking about, well, being a messy adult after having been a gifted kid.
It feels a little odd we haven't done this until now, you know?
I feel like we've touched on it several times here and there, but yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Name of the thing and the thing.
So there were a few, this has been something that I've been thinking about lately, and then there were a few Reddit posts in the After Gifted subreddit that made me think, because and there were several, so I'm combining, but the gist was, I look at proof of all of my previous accomplishments. I have trophies, I have ribbons, I have photos of me doing these amazing things, but that was then, and this is now. And I can't do anything now. I have no successes now. I'm a mess now. So it's, I was so great when I was in fifth grade, but now I'm nothing. Or, I did this one thing and I'll never be able to do anything again. And that mindset really can just grind you down pretty quickly. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Seriously.
Got to get the conversation going somehow.
Yes, I have experienced that every waking moment of my entire adult life. Yes. Yes. And yes, it's infuriating, it's embarrassing, it's disheartening. Hang on, let me check my emotion wheel for more. Yeah, okay. Embarrassing. Yep, got that. Insecure, jealous, suspicious, embarrassed, disillusioned, perplexed, shocked, dismayed, astonished. Yeah, a whole bunch of things, all on that crappy side of the wheel. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why we might have been gifted kids and now we're just messy adults. Um, I think a lot of them have to do with not being aware and accepting the changes in your circumstances. Um, so, a lot of former gifted kids were hyperlexic as kids. And now as grown adults, we barely read at all when we used to get through, a book or two a day. And that's because for a lot of us, we were in uh, a not great emotional situation or home life or a good social life. And so reading was a coping mechanism. And so you read a lot because you had to, otherwise, you would have been consumed and killed by your emotions. Now that you're not using that as a way to stay alive, you can't do it as well because the truth was you couldn't do it then either, but you weren't quite so aware of the consequences. There was also, when we were kids, a lot of stuff was taken care of for us. So you didn't have to feed yourself. You didn't have to do your laundry. You didn't have to drive yourself. You didn't have to do your taxes and on and on and on and on. Now you do have to do a lot of that. And it eats up a lot more executive function and willpower and time than I think we really give ourselves credit for because it's what you're supposed to do. It's what everybody does. Why can't you manage? Well, you
Just
you you are managing, but you're also trying to, play 6 hours of World of Warcraft a day. Well, I could do that when I was 15. Well, yeah, because you had school and then some homework, and then just to avoid the rest of your family was the rest of your job. And like, oh, well, I'm doing fewer things, but they're more complicated things and they're more emotionally charged things. Also, now you have grown-up relationships with other grown-ups that take a little bit more, thought and effort than being best friends with the person who lived two horses down because you liked the same band, you know? And then there's also, like I said before, you weren't aware of the consequences. A lot of us really, really overextend ourselves when we're young, partly for the alexithymia, partly for the disconnect between our brains and our bodies, and we don't know that we're overextending ourselves until we try to do that as adults. And when you try to overextend yourself as adult, you end up, unemployed and, unable to get out of bed for a couple of days because you can't just have a couple of sick days where your parents bring you soup. I mean, you can, but, parents are far away now. So I think it's a lot of things. And I think the central issue is that we're trying to compare ourselves now to ourselves not now and not taking into account, you know, the differences in our situations and the differences in our bodies. My body didn't do that before is kind of like going to your mechanic and being like, hey, it says I need to change the oil, but for the past 100,000 miles, it hasn't said that I need to do that. So why should I have to do it now? I didn't have to do it then. Or I have to replace my brake pads. I didn't have to do that the first week I had the car, but this week now I have to. I'm like, well, yes, things change and they run down and they have to be topped back up and repaired. And we ignore that context to our peril.
yeah, I think that it's hard to look back at a time of success and compare it to present circumstances, and your immediate reaction is things were good then, things are bad now. I did that once, I can't do it again. And for some reason, we take the norm as the cycle of failure as opposed to the success. And I think you're right. We ignore a lot of components like all of the things that, as you said, were taking care of us, for us, or maybe things that we didn't have to do. Our life circumstances were different, but we also can fail to take into account some of the habits or some of the circumstances we put ourselves in to make ourselves successful. I just started doing stand up again after what, a decade, and it's very easy for me to think of, oh man, I used to be booked for a weekend at Zany's, and I used to travel all over the Midwest and doing shows, and it was really great. And now I'm at open mics again with, 50 comics, and nobody knows me, and having to really work from the ground up again. And it's easy to think of that past success and go, well, maybe I wasn't that good. Maybe that was just a fluke, and forget about the fact that no, I had years of grinding at, open mics, and if I'm going to do that again, I can do the same thing. I've just got to put in all that groundwork. We tend to forget the hard work that got us the success and just remember the end point and want to repeat that without necessarily wanting to go back in and do all of that hard work that got us there in the first place.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, especially if you have this like rosy tinted version of how you performed in the past of like, but I was a natural. Like, well, no, you just you don't tend to remember the super awkward and the failures and the fall downs because it's less pleasant to remember.
And I think on the journey, the first time you go through a journey like that, every new step is an accomplishment. Like, oh,
Hmm.
I'm super excited. I got booked to be, the MC on a Thursday night, and those little successes all seem like you're at the top of the world.
Hmm.
But once you've been through a progression of success and you've hit some pinnacle, then those things don't give you the rush that they used to. Like if I got booked to be an MC somewhere, great, you know. Um, that is what is difficult now, as I'm doing more public speaking, the same jobs that I used to just be so excited and so proud and want to tell everybody about. Now it's like, oh, that's kind of the norm. I'm looking at something bigger and then I'll be excited about it. And that's just part of what we do, I think, is, our brain craves that novelty and that excitement, and things are only exciting once, really, or there's a limited amount of times that we can experience the same kind of thing before our brain is like, okay, been there, done that. And that makes you feel like you're not succeeding. Even if you are objectively having success, it doesn't feel the same. So that's another thing is maybe you are accomplishing things, but they just don't have the same zing to your brain and to your soul as they used to. So to you, it doesn't feel like success.
Hmm. Yeah, especially for neurodivergence. I had a friend who used to say, your brain is a differential engine. It just looks for changes and it clocks them. So, like, if I'm talking to somebody and they're feeling very scared, it's like, oh, okay, what was the change that brought about this sensation of being scared? And it's just your body trying to think for you and going, hey, something's changed and I'm worried about it. So, when you're neurodivergent, novelty is huge. It's huge. It's a massive part of how your brain runs. Like it's one of like the big four motivators for getting your neurodivergent brain to do something. And so the first time, like you said, you're middling for somebody, oh my God, that's amazing. That's that's so novel and that's so wonderful. But once you've done that a couple of times, you stop noticing it. So I've even seen someone who did like a halfway scientific slash artsy study where when you feel like your life is kind of flying by, a lot of that is because you're not doing anything novel. Or if we're going off of, the bad 84 Dune movie, the sleeper must awaken. He must be faced with new challenges. So this person did something super uncomfortable every day for like a month. And they said that time really, really slowed down for them. But it was also exhausting because it was novelty and not necessarily like a good thing, like, oh, I tried a different coffee today. It was like, go find a street and lay down in the middle of it for a full 60 seconds.
Listeners, we are not condoning going and laying in the middle of a street for any length of time.
Absolutely not. And this person had like a couple of people with them to like, call out if somebody came around the corner on the block. But the sensation of time slowing during that uncomfortable and that novel activity really, really, really landed home for them how much our brain just kind of glosses over regularity.
Hmm. Is there a recognition aspect to this too? Because I think about, the people who said, oh, I was looking at my trophies. They aren't just thinking about success. They're looking at like physical manifestations of their success, physical proof that they did a thing and it mattered and they were rewarded for it. So do you think that matters when it comes to thinking about past successes, if there is that like physical thing or if there is that recognition aspect to it?
Oh, absolutely. It's external validation. Um, and what's the joke? I was a gifted kid in fifth grade, and you know what? I still am. Put me back in that room with some fifth graders, and I am going to beat the snot out of them in every competition. It's you were being judged on a very, very narrow criteria that was very clear cut, and it was designed for someone to succeed. But now we're trying to do a million different things, and our world is not designed for you to succeed, particularly. Most of our world is designed to make profit for someone. And if you succeed along the way, that'd be nice, but it's not terribly important.
You know, you have to meet your own criteria for success. Now, there isn't necessarily some external group, who says, you are number one, you are the best, you have value, you have worth. You actually have to assess and determine your own worth. And there are things, that are those external validators, like maybe promotions or, finishing a,
Mhm.
a, a project or something. But most often, I think we are the determiners of what success is. And maybe that's why some people aren't feeling, capturing that feeling because they don't have somebody just patting them on the head saying, "No, you're great. You're smarter than everybody. You're doing wonderfully." Setting your own success and patting yourself on the head saying, "I'm great. I'm smart enough," doesn't really do the same thing as an armful full of trophies does. That's kind of a shortcut to, yeah, I'm accomplished. Look. But now it's like I don't have anything. Nobody's giving me anything. Nobody's saying I'm great anymore. Like, was I a fraud then? Am I a fraud now? Did I used to be great, but now I'm not? Now I'm pathetic. What am I if people aren't telling me I'm great all the time? Well, I'm nothing.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and it's easy to be like, well, you should just, respect and value yourself without external validation. It's like, okay, well, yes, I should also have a salad twice a day. Like, it's easy to say you should be okay with this. It's a whole different thing to actually become okay with it.
Hmm. I think, that's a good point because how you feel and how your brain is wired to sense reward is individual. I think looking at the things that have made you feel good in the past and figuring out what was it about those things. Was it because, oh, I just had a physical representation of being successful. Okay, then maybe every time you finish a new presentation or if you, do something great, if you grow a cool plant or whatever, maybe you take pictures of those and mount them like you would trophies, things like that. Maybe if your brain is not good at remembering those successes and needs those external reminders, make external reminders. That's fine.
Hmm.
Or was it the fact that it was somebody else saying that you did a good job or that what so there are different elements of, I think, those rewards, and if you break it down you can figure out what piece was it that triggered your mind specifically so that you can try to not necessarily recreate or replicate it but give it something else that kind of hits on that same sweet spot. Is it just your boss telling you, yeah, your work is good? Then you can talk about, I mean, some of the discussions I have with employees is how do you like to be recognized? Because we do need that. That is important, And so if you're not getting enough recognition or validation, maybe that's a conversation you can have at work. Here is how I prefer to have my efforts recognized. Here's how I know I'm doing a good job. So I think we can feed the different parts of our brain, but that requires more mental work and self-recognition than just going, well, I used to be great, now I'm nothing. Everything is terrible, which is often how I prefer to handle the situation. It's just to wallow. Wallowing is much easier. It's not pleasant, but it's much easier.
It almost is pleasant in that it's easy.
It's familiar.
Yeah, for that kind of stuff, I try to think like a video game. So like uh I was just watching a video about the relative popularity of different MMORPG games. And I was thinking about how, back in 2005, oh God, when I started playing World of Warcraft 20 years ago, there were a handful of psychological studies that said that people with depression were more likely to get addicted to these kinds of games. Addicted with air quotes. And a big part of that is because the game rewards you in such an effusive manner that, like, when you hit a new level, there's this cool little animation and this big sound, and you get a little thing at the bottom of the screen that's going, hey, Good job, you did a thing. It's very visceral and it's very satisfying. Whereas, some of the less popular games of that type, like Lord of the Rings Online, it's more subdued with how it does that kind of stuff. It's trying to be more Tolkien-y, it's a bit more dry. It's not quite as bright and flashy and silly. And it's frankly not as satisfying as something like World of Warcraft or something like Final Fantasy 14, where you cast a spell in Lord of the Rings Online and there's a little ball of light. You do that in WoW and there's a bigger ball of light and maybe a little aura around you. You cast a spell in Final Fantasy 14 and there's like a 3-second animation and like shadow effects and a whole bunch of sparkly stuff. Like, you casted a spell and that's awesome. And that really taps into your brain and gives you that external validation that you don't necessarily get when you come home with the groceries. I mean, I get an
Hmm.
excited dog. That's really wonderful. But, nobody walks up to me and hands me a golden slip and says, "You are the best. Excellent out of you, Ellie." Because that's just not the way that reality works, because reality isn't a video game. So those components of the game are there on purpose because they work, because they reward you and make you want to keep playing the game and keep getting that validation. And so it's almost good self-care to come up with some kind of silly over the top reward for yourself for completing leveling in real life, which is, taking the trash out, doing the dishes, getting groceries, going to work every day, completing your projects.
Hmm.
Otherwise it kind of dissipates into the background of mundanity.
Yeah, I think being the cheerleader of your own success is something that we talk about in a work context, but also in a home context too. We talk about at work that you need to be the megaphone for your accomplishments because nobody else is going to notice. They're all doing their own thing. So if you did something cool, if you were successful, if did something, you have to be the one to share with people and say, I did this. Because if you sit back, nobody's going to notice you. And it's often women that don't like to communicate that way. Men are often more comfortable announcing their achievements. But really, in a way, it's good publicity. And so I think there's nothing wrong with being at home and saying, hey, did you see? I cleaned the kitchen.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not, of course, you should clean the kitchen. And of course, if you're in a relationship, there's all sorts of, dynamics that come into play into who does what. But the point is you did something. And if you need that validation or if you want somebody to go, good job, and they're not going to notice, then put your hand up and say, hey, I did a thing, especially if it was hard. Look, I haven't put away those 3 loads of laundry that have been sitting in our room for a week, but I did it today. Yeah, I did it a week late, but the point is I did it today. And that is the accomplishment that I want recognition for. And I don't see a problem with, to me, that's just a way of getting your needs met and being communicative about your needs rather than going, God, I wish that you would notice that I put 3 loads of laundry away. Just saying it and getting that recognition can be really, really helpful.
Thank you for putting laundry away, by the way. I did notice because I had more socks.
Well, I mean, that was days ago. There's 2 more loads of laundry now in the bedroom.
We didn't sign up for our families to never have dirty clothes. We signed up for our families to have enough clean clothes to be getting on with. It's
Mhm.
okay if laundry is ongoing because it is.
I think we also forget sometimes the small things that lead up to the big thing or led up to the big success. So, for example, I had a really successful speaking engagement. Audience was great. Everybody loved it. It went fantastically. And then I get home and it's like, well, now what? It's a good practice to go back and think of, well, what did I do to get this cool gig? What are the things that I had to do? Well,
Ooh, yeah.
first I had to have a website so that people could find me. And then I had to keep updating that. So I stayed at the top of the Google results. And I had to put a lot of content out so people could see all the ideas that I had. And um, I had to have a meeting and really impress people in this meeting. And when you remember all of the things that you had to do to get something, it can make that accomplishment seem as big as it should be, because it is
Hmm.
a big deal. But it also helps you see, okay, here's what I need to do to maintain that success or to repeat that success so that you don't end up with this question going, well, why did it work this one time and it's never going to work again? It wasn't necessarily just a magical confluence of circumstances. There were things that you did to put yourself into a place so that when those circumstances happen, you were able to take advantage. You were ready. But those are all things that we tend to just block out of our minds. And, that's really, really tough. It's really tough.
Hmm. I'm reminded of a TED Talk back when they were actually cool and not just commercials, of a guy who had just finished a book where he was going to live biblically every day for a year.
I remember that
Um,
guy.
yeah, and it hilariously starts with one of the things is you can't sit on a chair that a menstruating woman has sat on. So in like the first week when his wife found out about that rule, she went and sat in every chair in the house. So he had to get a little like camping stool that he just brought everywhere and sat on. Um,
I
which
like her.
hilarious. Yeah. But he said the thing that really struck him and changed the way he thought was giving thanks for like everything. So, he gets somewhere and thanks the Lord that the car didn't explode on the way there. And so every little thing that happened in his day, he had to stop and be thankful for. And it isn't necessarily that you need to stop and thanks Magic Sky Daddy, but you stop and you acknowledge all of those good things going right because they could have gone bad. And that really brings home how fortunate we are that so many things go right. I
Hmm.
mean, we exist in a very, very complicated world that's held together by very, very complicated systems, and we just get used to them. I mean, I turn on the faucet and water comes out in a desert on the fourth floor in summer. What? So much infrastructure and knowledge and blood, sweat, and tears went into making that happen, but I'm annoyed because it's not cold enough right away.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we forget that we are the same people who did the cool thing. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
I am still the person who won the math contest in the third grade and went to young authors and, got to do the high school while I was still in junior high. And I'm still that person. I'm still the person who did whatever cool thing that, I've gotten to do. But sometimes you need to remind yourself of that. What are the characteristics that caused me to have success before? And am I using those right now? How can I build those up? How can I implement those more in my life? Because we tend to, again, we get into our flow, like just as you said, time kind of goes on, and you start to maybe not use every part of your self and your intellect and your brain and your body that you could. So are there other ways that you can approach things so that you're playing into your strengths? But you're that exact same person. You've got more knowledge now, you've got more life now, but those characteristics that were inherent in you then are still inherent in you. They just might express themselves differently now. So I think that can be helpful too, but it wasn't a different you. That was really you. And it wasn't a fluke then, and it won't be a fluke the next time.
Well, that's a deeply satisfying note to end on. So I think that'll just about wrap it up for this episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult. Jess, where can people find out more about you?
People can find me at coachjessicamichaels.com, and you can sign up for a free coaching session to find out if ADHD or autism coaching is right for you.
Awesome. Awesome. That can be very helpful and really improve your life in a lot of ways. Well, if you like our show, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And for any other information, please email us your questions, comments, or just outright praise. And let us know how you celebrate your little achievements by emailing us at giftedkidmessyadult@gmail.com. So until next time, take care of each other out there.
Bye.